Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a representative of the people of Timmins-James Bay, I'm particularly proud tonight to rise and speak to this bill to designate September 23rd as a national day to recognize the hunting, fishing, and trapping as a heritage cultural activity in our country. Mr. Speaker, the people of Timmins-James Bay have long been deeply involved in celebrating and living a way of life that is very much based on the land. And I want to say at the outset, we recognize within the Parliament of Canada that the issues around fishing rights, the issues around licensing of hunting and how that is carried out, these are certainly provincial jurisdictions, and we have no problem recognizing the authority of the provincial jurisdictions across the country. However, I think there is a role for the federal House to play in recognizing the importance of hunting and fishing and trapping. And some of my colleagues have spoken about the huge financial role that it plays within our economy and within our communities, and I fully recognize that. But tonight I would like to speak on the role that we can play as a federal House in recognizing the heritage, historic, and present cultural activities. Because, Mr. Speaker, Canada is becoming increasingly urban. Many people recognize this and have spoken about it. And I think it's important that we go back to where our roots have been. You know, long before there were any highways in this country, they were the rivers. And the rivers were the original highways that brought people throughout this country. And what drew them initially was the relationship between the European settlers and the First Nations around the fur trade. This is a relationship that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. If you look in the region that I represent, Mr. Speaker, Lake Timmins-James was the waterway that brought the fur trade north. There's meeting places on the Quebec side, the old fort, but the people of Timmins-James, they traditionally called it Obajuwan. It was the meeting place. It was the meeting place where people came to trade. So as the Europeans came into this, the Northwest Company, the Orkney Islanders working for the Hudson's Bay Company, they were meeting with the First Nation people who already had in place standards for how they were moving the furs. The furs were brought up through Lake Timmins-James, up through places like Fort Matachewan, up the Abitibi, that went into the large rivers feeding into the James Bay lowlands, the Moose River, the Matagami River, all the way to Moose Factory. Mr. Speaker, I don't think anybody in Ontario knows the fact, unless of course they're from the north. Many people in Ontario don't know the fact that the oldest English settlement in Ontario is Moose Factory, because Moose Factory was the center of the fur trade going back to the 1600s. So this was the original economic relationship within Canada. Now, Mr. Speaker, many people might say, well, that was hundreds of years ago. I would like to say that our trappers are still active in Timmins-James Bay. Hundreds of years later, we still have a trapping economy. And if you go north into the upper regions, north of 50 in my region, Mr. Speaker, the First Nation economy is still very much dependent on hunting and trapping and fishing rights. And I'm very glad that the member from the Conservative Party who brought this forward recognized the need to recognize the First Nation rights that exist under Section 35. So this is an example, Mr. Speaker, this bill, that amidst all the partisanship and the rancor that exists in the House of Commons, that it is possible for all four parties to come together at certain times and work together, and I think this bill is one of them. Mr. Speaker, I think of the volunteers who keep our land-based activities so strong in Northern Ontario. Ducks Unlimited do such incredible work with the recovery of wetlands, and I have to only go to the Hilliardton Marsh to see the incredible job that Ducks Unlimited play and the involvement of young students, of community volunteers. In the Kirkland Lake area, the Kirkland and District Fish and Game Society, again, a volunteer base, but they do so much work in terms of restocking, ensuring that our local lakes remain vibrant and a source for community involvement. I think, Mr. Speaker, what we need to do better as politicians is work more with the hunters and the fishers and the trappers who are out there at the grassroots level, to listen, as if we say in the First Nation communities, their traditional ecological knowledge. I think we can't get the bureaucracy and the so-called scientific approach to land management to get too far separated from the people who are on the ground. Because, Mr. Speaker, if you go into Larder Lake in September, or you go to Matachewan, or you go to Cochrane in the fall, you will find so many hundreds of families who are so intricately involved in their exploration of their traditional way of life, which is the hunt camp, which is the moose hunt, the fishing, the people who go out and hunt partridge. I think we can do a better job of involving the frontline people who love hunting and fishing, who want to make sure that we have sustainable levels of moose, who want to make sure that we have sustainable levels of deer and caribou. Let's work with the volunteers of these organizations and the hunters and fishers and get some of their expertise. Mr. Speaker, this is a bill, I think, that reminds us that this is where we've been, but this is where we are, and this is where we are going to continue to be. Because we have been blessed all across Canada. I'm particularly favorable to Timmins-James Bay, but all across Canada is such an immense bounty from our lakes, from our wildlife. And we must continue to ensure that that is a sustainable bounty that remains for the next generation. I think, Mr. Speaker, if you look and you talk to the hunters and the fishers and the trappers, you will see people who are on the front lines of conservation. These are people who not only want to defend a long-standing way of life and a long-standing culture, but they are people who are very involved in ensuring that we have the proper duck habitat, that we maintain solid populations of moose and caribou across the north. I want to celebrate, Mr. Speaker, the traditional hunting, gathering cultures of our north, and to recognize that our hunters and fishers, that culture is something to be celebrated. Hunting and fishing is something to be protected. And hunting and fishing and trapping is so much a part of what Canada is. We should be recognizing this day, and we should thank those on the front lines who are doing so much in the way of conservation. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is a cultural activity, and I think it would be incumbent upon me to quote from the Bard of Northern Ontario. I was once referred to by Peter Zowski as the Bard of Northern Ontario, but I think this poet has taken up the mantle, Mr. Charlie Smith from Massey, who writes about the hunting and fishing and trapping culture. In the book, The Beast That God Has Kissed, which, by the way, I wrote the introduction for, but I'm not giving myself a plug. But this is what Charlie Smith says about the hunting culture of the north, and I think we need a poet who can really speak to the immense beauty and depth of emotion that we have when it comes to hunting and fishing and trapping. Our coats all turn to fire when the light is going down. It's a mighty rite of autumn, making meat out of the ground. When the season turns to winter, you'll find us cold and fey, every one a shining beacon at the closing of the day. We bring death like gifts of wonder. We take life out of the gray. We fade in and out like whispers, then we silent slip away. We are technologic predators, singing songs as old as time, as we join the waltz of winter when the horned one's in its prime. The ravens cheer and guide us, and the new men hate our way, with our coats of fiber fire at the closing of the day. Mr. Speaker, the New Democratic Party of Canada supports the long-standing traditions of our hunters, our fishers, and our trappers. We support the efforts of conservation, and we support a day to recognize the unique cultural importance of hunting, fishing, and trapping, not just in Northern Ontario, not just in communities like Larder Lake and Cochrane and Moose Factory and Attawapiskat, but all across Canada, because it is a culture that is based in our land, and our land, the land of Canada, is second to none in this world. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.